Hello everyone, my name is Aakanksh Gurnani, and welcome to my YouTube channel Neuro Chat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism spectrum disorder, and more. On the channel, I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists, seeking their views and updates on their latest work, research, etc. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Dr. Aubyn Stahmer is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of California, Davis Mind Institute. She is renowned for her expertise in the field of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, with a particular focus on early intervention and community-based services. Dr. Stahmer's research primarily revolves around developing and implementing effective evidence-based practices for young children with ASD, ensuring that these practices are accessible and sustainable within community settings. Her work integrates clinical research with practical application, aiming to bridge the gap between research findings and real-world treatment. Her commitment to advancing the understanding and treatment of autism continues to drive her research and professional endeavors. Dr. Stahmer, welcome, and thank you very much for the time today. Can you please tell our audience a little about yourself?
Sure. I work at the University of California, Davis Mind Institute, which is a center for research and clinical services for children with all kinds of neurodevelopmental conditions, bless you, including autism. I work in the area of autism, and we do research and also clinical work with families. Usually in my work, our team works with young kids, but at the Mind Institute, people work with kids across the lifespan. And so I got my training at UC San Diego with Dr. Laura Schreibman many years ago, but I've been here in Sacramento at the Mind Institute for about 9 years.
What inspired you to pursue a career in autism research and intervention, and what keeps you motivated in the challenging yet rewarding field it is?
It's funny, I read a book in junior high about a teacher who had an autistic student in her class, and it was really interesting to me. And I don't think I thought then that I would be an autism researcher, but it got me interested. I always wanted to work with kids. And when I was in college, I got to do an internship with Dr. Sally Rogers, who's now at the Mind Institute. And so I got to learn more about early intervention and work with parents. And so I just kept that sort of little kernel from that book in the back of my mind as I was going through college and graduate school, and it kept me interested. I've been doing the same thing for over 30 years now, so I do have to keep motivated. But what keeps me motivated are the kids and the families. They're so much fun and do such great things and work so hard that it's always great to be with them. And now I do less clinical work and more mentoring of other clinicians and researchers. And that's really rewarding because they are doing amazing things that I could have never even thought of. And I learned so much from working with them. So that keeps me really motivated.
Yeah, thank you so much. So your research has significantly contributed to the development of naturalistic developmental behavior interventions for young children with autism. Can you elaborate on the key components of NDBI and discuss how these interventions differ from traditional behavioral approaches?
Sure. So NDBI have been around a long time. My advisor was working on developing one when I was in graduate school, but it takes a long time for us to get the testing done. And so these are interventions that combine the principles of applied behavior analysis with developmental science. And so we can use strategies that teach kids new things in the context of how they would normally learn things in their interactions with their parents and they're playing with other kids during their school day. So we don't have to separate them to teach them new things, but we just set up the environment in a way to help autistic kids who learn a little differently learn more successfully. So they have communication, so they aren't as frustrated and they can tell us what they need. whether through words or pictures. And so the NDBI strategies really help kids do that in a natural way. They let kids choose the toys or activities or topics they want to work on. Even though the teacher might have some goals in mind, there's lots of choices for the child or the student, which is really nice. And then you're talking about or doing things that the child cares about, so they're more likely to remember it and learn it, just like we would be. And so the interactions and the learning takes place in usually in play-based settings. So I think it's more fun. And then it's still structured enough that autistic kids who have trouble learning in really busy or confusing environments can really make great strides and understand what's expected.
And what are some of the major challenges you encountered in implementing NDBI within community settings? And how have you addressed the said challenges to ensure effective and sustainable interventions?
Well, when we test interventions of all kinds for everybody, we test them in a clinic, right? With families who can come to a research clinic and have the time and resources to do that, with kids who have mostly autism as their primary condition. They might not have a lot, they might be excluded if they have a lot of other things. And so when you go out into the community, it's everybody in, right? Which it should be. But kids have different needs than the kids who come to a research center for a particular treatment. And so one of the challenges is making sure that the treatment fits the kids that are being served in the community environment. And the other thing is that it fits the service system. So when you come to a research study, all we're doing is that one treatment and all we're focused on, and everybody's super well trained in that treatment. And, the child's getting other services somewhere else. But if I'm a school teacher or an early intervention provider or a mental health provider in the community, I have to think about, all the things that child needs. What else is the school asking me to teach them? Not just communication, but I have to teach them to read and math and to get along with their friends. And so I'm not just focused on this one thing. So we have to make sure those strategies fit within their context as well. So we've been working with them on that. And then the other really important thing we've found recently is that you can't expect someone like a teacher to go learn a strategy, a really complicated strategy, because these are complicated, and go back to their classroom and do it without support. So we've been doing training with leaders, principals, special education directors, mental health program directors, to teach them how to support the providers, to give them the time, the resources, the materials that they need to use these interventions. And that has been extremely successful and really important, that we can't expect people to do things by themselves.
Your work focuses on making evidence-based practices accessible within community settings. Could you share some successful strategies or models that have been effective in training community practitioners?
Yeah, I think the most important part is working with community partners from the beginning, so that when we develop a training program or a strategy, we know it's more likely to work or be acceptable because they helped us develop it, right? And so we had a really great ongoing program that started in San Diego almost 20 years ago, where before we had many kids diagnosed with autism under 3, and people were like, we are getting these kids, what do we do? And so we got a really great group of community providers and researchers together to look at the research, to look at what was happening in practice, and to adapt an evidence-based program that would fit the service system. We also had the funders involved in that collaboration. And so now, through getting grants and also using public funding, they've trained in San Diego, I think 30 different agencies in this evidence-based practice. And almost every child going through early intervention who's autistic in that community can have access to this service now. And that group's been meeting for almost 20 years to make sure all kids have access to that service. So I think that collaboration is so important, and that one is especially successful.
That sounds awesome.
It was really fun.
I'm so glad that worked out. And how do you involve families in the intervention process, and what role do they play in successful treatments?
Yeah, so from the very beginning of my training, we were doing what's called parent implemented interventions, where parents learn the strategies to use with their kids. And that's why the natural strategies are so much more appealing to me. And so I don't think parents should be like their child's therapist and have to do all the things. Some people argue we could just do that. But I do think that it's your parent, right? They need to be involved in everything that's happening. So they can help set up the goals that are important to the parents and to the family and to the culture, to the child. And then once goals are set up, parents can learn strategies to help support what their kids learning in therapy or at school all day long, because parents are with them in lots of different places and lots of different settings. And that can really help everybody understand each other better in a family, help set up the home environment so the autistic child can understand it better and get their needs met better, and just really helps everybody's quality of life. And also they're the parent, so they get to pick some things.
When you said like parents get to pick some things, like could you like explain that a little bit more?
Well, you can imagine that we work with toddlers, right? So if you're 2 or 3 years old, whether you have autism or not, your parents are kind of making all your decisions for you, right? And so it's important then, as a therapist, if you're thinking about what do I want to teach this child or how do I want to support this child so they can learn better, that you're doing things that make sense for the parent and the family and that the parent agrees with it, right? So that you're not just doing something in therapy that never gets used or is against what the parents want the child to be doing. So we want to give the child as much agency all the time, even when they're 2. They can pick what they're going to play with and they can really guide the session. So that helps them then be independent as they grow older, and help the parents see that they don't have to structure everything. They can give the child lots of choices and agency, but also they are still the parent. And just like any 2-year-old, they get to help make decisions about what they want their child to be working on and playing with and what fits with their culture and their family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. So like bridging the gap between research findings and real world practice is a central theme in your work. Could you discuss some of the methods and approaches you use to translate research into practical everyday applications?
Yeah. So I've talked a little bit about the main way is working with community providers. We do a lot of measurement of how people are using the evidence-based strategies in the new setting, and that teaches us a lot. So, for example, we did a study where we took an evidence-based NDBI into schools, and it had been made for parents to work one-on-one with their kids. And so teachers were wanting to use it, but how do you use it in a group? And, so we took a lot of data on how they were using it already, what they were doing, and also talked to them about how they were using it. And there were a couple of the steps that were really hard for them to use. And they also said, I don't think these are really appropriate for the young kids we have. I think when this was developed with older kids, it doesn't make sense. And so then we can take that feedback. We went back into the lab and tested those changes. And one of the changes, they were completely right about that. This is not developmentally appropriate for these kids. It's really hard. Let's just not do it, right? And then there were a couple of other things where like, this is really hard, but we were like, yeah, but the research shows we really need to do it. So how can we adapt it to make it work for you? And so that sort of back and forth between the practice and then making sure it still works by measuring how well people are doing it or how people are adapting it has been very helpful in making those changes. So sometimes teachers will say, this part's really hard, but then we watch and they're doing it really well. So we need to just be able to say, no, it's okay. You're doing that really well. It's not that hard. And that helps them feel better about it too. So that back and forth is kind of our primary way of making sure that adaptation works well.
Based on like your research and experience, how crucial is early intervention in the developmental trajectory of children with autism, and what long-term outcomes have you observed in children who receive early and appropriate intervention?
Yeah. So It's really different depending on the child, right? And so you have kids who respond really well to early intervention, and kids who make progress at a slower pace, even with early intervention. And so it's hard to make a global statement. To me, the earlier we can help kids communicate their needs in a way that other people can understand, the less frustrated they are, regardless of whether they meet our sort of standards of making progress. Like, that is huge to me, that they can communicate what they need. And that is a very big focus of early intervention. So parents can understand how to interact with their kids in ways that work for the kids, and that makes the parents feel more successful, the kids feel more successful, that relationship gets better. So regardless of their developmental trajectory, I think it really helps with quality of life for the whole family, whether that child ends up learning to talk or not, or anything. So that's really important part of early intervention. And then kids develop no matter what, right? So sometimes it's hard to do studies to be like, what happens with early intervention and what happens without, because some kids do really well either way. But what most of the data are showing is that early intervention makes a difference in terms of how well kids do later on traditional measures of doing well, like where they are in school, and are they talking, and how are they doing on standardized testing and things like that. We are just starting to measure more practical things like quality of life and how do they feel about the intervention, and are some interventions early not good, like do they cause kids self-esteem challenges, or do kids try to act in ways that aren't comfortable for them? Like, those are things that can happen too, and we're just starting to understand and measure that with feedback from autistic adults, right? So I think we'll better understand that later. I do have had really great opportunities to travel to countries that don't have early intervention services, and you see kids that have greater challenges with communication and interacting with the environment, because the environment hasn't been set up for them as early as it can. And so I think in that way, it makes a really big difference, regardless of how their developmental trajectory goes.
That reminds me of that one quote that, I seem to hear like everywhere, that, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
Absolutely.
But like, how do you see the field of autism research and treatment evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? And what role do you think technology can play in supporting individuals with autism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I hope technology can really help us. So I'm hoping it can do silly things, not silly things, but so parents spend a lot of time when they first learn their child is autistic, figuring out our service system. So in our country, we have a fair amount of services, and it's really complicated to figure out where to get them. Do I get them from school? Do I get them from developmental services? Do I go through my insurance? Where can I find a provider that does the thing I need? It's really complicated. And so we have people now that can help with that. They're called service navigators, and it takes and I think talking to a person is good, but also people spend a lot of time searching the internet for resources. And I feel like AI could do this, right? Like, I want to be able to put the age and the need and where I live, and have the AI help me with, here's the service system, here's your school district's phone number, you need to write them a letter, they won't take a phone call, that kind of thing, to help families navigate the system in a simpler way, because that will get kids access to service sooner. I'm also hopeful it can help us, kind of like we said, kids need individualized service, right? Because every kid is different. And right now we have sort of global information on like NDBIs work for communication. But in reality, when a provider is using that strategy, they're adapting it in really subtle ways to make it work for the child, in ways that, like, a good provider, it's like a dance, right? And they're adapting as they go, and how challenging they're being, or when they're changing materials and all of that. And I think we could use technology to analyze videos to help us figure out how to operationalize those things, and then how to do something like, here's the age of the child, here's their interests, and help us individualize that more systematically, rather than waiting for a provider to have so much experience or be really good at it to make it happen. So I think technology can really help us with sort of that personalized medicine aspect. I am not a geneticist or an image brain person, and so I don't know exactly what the next steps there will be. But I think that there is lots of room for using virtual reality to do some teaching and training and areas of interest to autistic people, interview skills, things like that, that they've asked for information on. And then generally just understanding how our brains work, and how those differences in how our brains work can help us understand what the best way to support someone is.
How do you see autism research and treatment intersecting with broader issues like mental health, disability rights, and social justice?
Yeah, this is a good big question you had. So I think 70 to 80% of autistic people also have other co-occurring mental health challenges. So like I said, anxiety, depression. From what neurodiverse individuals say, is some of that comes from having to live in an environment where they're not accepted, trying to act like a neurotypical person, called camouflaging, for example, or masking. And so I think how that intersects with disability rights and social justice is making sure that our environments are inclusive and allow for people to have differences in how they interact, how they behave, how are, having places where people don't have, sensory things come up for them because it's an inclusive sensory environment, would really hopefully reduce some of those mental health challenges people are having that come from environmental differences. And so I think that is a disability rights issue that neurodivergent people have been really strongly advocating for, which has been great. And the disability rights movement is a really strong movement that's been around for decades. And I think that one of the things that's been happening as people are more aware of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues is that we have to think about then that intersectionality between disability and race, ethnicity, economics, LGBTQ, things like that. Those, everybody with a disability also belongs to whatever other affinity group they belong to. Autistic people actually are more likely to be identify as transgender than other populations. So these sort of social justice issues become very important for the disability community in a lot of ways. And I think if we can work together in the middle of that intersectionality, we can move things forward, hopefully more quickly or more strongly.
Can you share some stories close to your heart with positive outcomes from your research or clinical work? I know you shared a few, but like another one or two would be nice.
So I had I'm trying to think if I can share this in a de-identified way. So I just had a really great experience of a child I worked with when she was very little in one of our programs. And I've kept in touch with her parents over the years, and we're doing an early intervention study right now. And we are looking for people to provide sort of monitoring of whether we have to have a board to monitor whether we're doing things well and doing things right. And we want to make sure we have some neurodivergent people on our board and people who understand research, right? So to make sure we're not doing something inadvertently that we shouldn't be doing. And so we were in contact, and she is going to be a part of our team for some of our work, which has been really fun to see her get to come back and contribute to early intervention research. So I was really excited about that.
Then my last question, what advice would you give to students or early career professionals interested in pursuing a career in autism research or treatment?
Do it. It's such a great field to be in. The kids, the families, adults, everyone's so amazing and interesting, and every day is different, which I just love. So I guess my advice is to think about like what area you want to go into. There's so much work to be done in autism. Like you could be an early intervention provider, a teacher, a therapist. You could be a researcher in behavioral intervention, or you could be a brain researcher or genetics, or lots of people doing work on the environment and how that affects developmental conditions. So kind of just think about where your interests are and follow that along and study with people who know that area. And then, get to know people who are neurodivergent. I know you've done that, but a lot of people go into a field and they really don't know what they're getting into or not what they're getting into, but like if you're trying to study how brains work or how genetics works about a particular condition, I feel like it's more helpful if you know people who have that condition and can understand what a real person is that has that condition. And so I guess I would recommend doing some of the work you're doing to get to know what people are like, what they are looking for, what they need, so that if you go into a research field, for example, you're doing work that has importance to the people that you're trying to help.
Thank you so much for the compliment. And yeah, I definitely experienced what you talked about, like how when you meet people, like your level of understanding, gets so much deeper and
Yeah.
broader. But yeah, thank you. So, Dr. Stahmer, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, and congratulations on all your amazing success. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thanks for making that fun and easy. You really know your timing better than I do. Thank you.